The sun hung low and merciless over the red rock canyons, painting shadows long as sin across the desert floor. Dust devils danced between the sagebrush, and the air shimmered with heat that could crack a man's lips in minutes. This was the edge of nowhere, where the law's reach grew thin and men could disappear into the landscape like ghosts. Cole Harrow knew these badlands better than most. 5 years of running had taught him every hidden spring, every box canyon that could shelter a wanted man, every trail that led away from civilization and its unforgiving justice. He sat his horse atop a weathered mesa, eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced wariness of the hunted. Below, barely visible through the heat haze, lay the town of Dust Creek, a collection of sun-bleached buildings huddled against the vastness like dice thrown on a poker table. He hadn't wanted to come down from the mountains. Up there, among the pines and cold streams, a man could almost forget what he'd done, who he'd been. But winter was coming, and even outlaws needed supplies. His saddlebags were near empty, his ammunition low, and his coffee had run out 3 days back, a hardship that finally drove him toward human company. Cole touched the brim of his hat, pulling it lower to shadow the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, the mark of a Bowie knife, earned in a saloon brawl in Tombstone years ago. It made him too easy to remember, too simple to identify. He'd grown his beard thick and let his hair hang long, but the scar remained, a permanent reminder of choices that couldn't be undone. The horse picked its way down the rocky trail, sure-footed despite the loose shale. Cole had stolen the animal fair and square from a ranch in New Mexico, but he'd grown fond of the bay gelding. It was steady, quiet, and didn't spook at gunfire, qualities a man in his position valued above speed or beauty. Dust Creek materialized from the desert like a mirage made solid. The main street was nothing but packed earth, rutted by wagon wheels and baked hard as adobe. False front buildings lined both sides: Murphy's General Store, the Cattleman's Bank, which Cole noted with professional interest, the Silver Dollar Saloon, and a handful of other establishments catering to the ranchers, miners, and drifters who passed through. Cole tied his horse outside the general store, keeping his head down and his hand near his colt. The few townspeople on the street paid him little mind. Strangers were common enough in these parts, and most folks had learned not to ask too many questions. Still, he felt their eyes on his back as he pushed through the door into the blessed shade of the store. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles and nervous hands, took Cole's order without comment. Bacon, beans, flour, coffee, ammunition for his Winchester and Colt, tobacco, and a new whetstone for his knife. Cole paid with worn bills, counting them out careful-like, aware that spending too much might draw attention. "Passing through?" the storekeeper asked, making conversation as he wrapped the goods in brown paper. "Maybe," Cole answered, his voice rough from disuse. "Depends on the weather." The man nodded. Understanding the code, weather meant trouble, and trouble could come in many forms out here. "Well, you picked a quiet time, though we got entertainment tonight, if you're inclined. Singer come through on the railroad, performing at the Silver Dollar." Cole grunted noncommittally, collected his packages, and headed back into the fading daylight. The sun was touching the western peaks now, turning them the color of fresh blood. He loaded his saddlebags, considering his options. Smart thing would be to ride on, make camp in the hills, avoid the town after dark when liquor flowed and tongues loosened. But something held him. Maybe it was the thought of music, of something beautiful in this hard place. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard a woman sing, not since before he'd taken to the Outlaw trail, back when he'd been just another cowhand with a quick temper and bad luck at cards. Night fell like a curtain dropping. Lanterns flickered to life along the street, casting pools of yellow light that made the darkness between them seem deeper. Cole found himself walking toward the saloon, drawn by the sound of voices and clinking glasses. He paused at the bat-wing doors, listening to the familiar sounds of a frontier evening, poker chips clicking, spurs jingling, the low rumble of masculine conversation. Then, cutting through it all like a silver thread through burlap, came a voice. It started low and sweet, barely above a whisper, singing words to an old ballad about lost love and distant mountains. But as the voice grew stronger, filling the saloon with its power, Cole felt something shift in his chest. It was like hearing water after days in the desert, like seeing the first star appear in a darkening sky. He pushed through the doors, keeping to the shadows along the wall. The saloon was typical of its kind, a long bar backed by a spotted mirror, round tables scarred by years of use, sawdust on the floor to soak up spilled beer and blood. But at the far end, on a small raised platform, stood the source of that remarkable voice. She wasn't what he'd expected. No painted saloon girl in bright silks and feathers, but a woman in a simple traveling dress of deep blue wool, her dark hair pinned up proper-like. Her face was illuminated by the oil lamps, and Cole saw features that might have been called plain in daylight, but were transformed by the passion of her singing into something altogether different. Her eyes were closed, lost in the music, and her hands clasped before her as if in prayer. The rough crowd had gone silent, even the poker players pausing their game to listen. It was the kind of hush that fell over men who'd forgotten there was beauty in the world, who suddenly remembered mothers and sweethearts and homes they'd left behind. Cole found an empty chair in the corner and sank into it, his packages at his feet, his hand still habitually near his gun. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about danger or pursuit or the next day's trail. He was simply listening, letting the voice wash over him like a benediction. The woman, Clara May, someone whispered her name, sang 3 more songs. Each one seemed to reach deeper into Cole's chest, stirring things he'd thought long dead. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, men stomping their boots and whistling appreciation. She curtsied gracefully, a small smile playing at her lips, and began to step down from the platform. That's when their eyes met. It was just a moment, her gaze sweeping the crowd and pausing on his face. But in that instant, Cole felt exposed, as if she could see through the beard and the trail dust to the man underneath. Her expression shifted slightly, curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Then the moment passed, and she was moving through the crowd toward the bar, accepting compliments with quiet dignity. Cole remained in his chair, aware that his heart was beating faster than it had during his last gunfight. The words rose unbidden to his lips, barely a whisper in the noisy saloon. The lonely outlaw wanted only a song, until her midnight voice set his blood on fire. He hadn't meant to speak aloud, but the truth of it shook him. He'd come to Dust Creek for supplies, nothing more. Now he found himself wanting to hear that voice again, to see what those eyes looked like in daylight, to know the story behind the sadness he'd glimpsed in her smile. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows and bringing the scent of sage and coming rain. Cole gathered his packages, preparing to leave before he did something foolish. But as he stood, he caught sight of Clara May at the bar, gracefully deflecting the advances of a drunk miner. Their eyes met again across the smoky room, and this time she held his gaze for a heartbeat longer. Then Cole was pushing through the doors into the night, the cold air sharp in his lungs. He walked to his horse, his mind churning with unfamiliar thoughts. Behind him, through the saloon's thin walls, he could hear the piano starting up again, and beneath it, like an echo in his memory, the sound of her voice. He should ride out now, while the darkness offered cover. Every instinct honed by years of survival screamed at him to leave, to return to the safety of the wilderness. But as he reached for his horse's reins, he hesitated. Somewhere in the saloon, men were talking, their voices carrying on the wind. He caught fragments. Stranger with the scar. Seen that face before. Might be worth checking. Cole's hand tightened on the leather. So his instincts had been right. Staying in town was dangerous. But for the first time in 5 years, danger wasn't the only thing on his mind. As he led his horse toward the livery stable instead of the open trail, he wondered if a man could die from wanting something as simple as a song, as impossible as a midnight voice that had set his blood on fire. Cole found himself back in the Silver Dollar, drawn like a moth to flame. He'd taken a room at the boarding house, paid for 3 nights in advance with money he couldn't spare, telling himself he needed rest and a real bed. But here he sat, nursing a whiskey in the same corner chair, waiting for her to sing again. The saloon was quieter tonight, just the regular crowd of cowboys and merchants. Clara May stood by the piano, discussing something with the player, a consumptive-looking man named Professor Hendricks who'd seen better days. She wore a different dress, green this time, and her hair caught the lamplight like polished mahogany. When she began to sing, Cole closed his eyes and let the memories come. He saw himself at 22, full of piss and vinegar, working cattle for the Double Bar Ranch outside Amarillo. Saw the card game that went bad when he caught the foreman dealing from the bottom. Saw the fight that followed, the flash of the knife, the blood on his hands. Self-defense. But the foreman had brothers, and they had influence. Cole had run that night and never stopped. The robberies started small, a stage here, a payroll there. Always from those who could afford the loss, he told himself. He rode with the Garrison gang for a while, until Jim Garrison decided to rob a church on Sunday morning, and Cole decided he'd had enough. That earned him enemies on both sides of the law. 5 years. 5 years of sleeping with one eye open, of scanning every horizon for dust clouds that might mean a posse. 5 years of being nobody, going nowhere, accumulating nothing but scars and regrets. Clara's voice rose on a particularly mournful note, singing about rivers that couldn't be crossed and bridges that couldn't be burned. Cole opened his eyes to find her looking directly at him, not the casual glance of a performer checking her audience, but a deliberate, searching look that made him want to both flee and move closer. When her set ended, she surprised everyone by stepping down from the platform and walking straight to his table. Up close, he could see the weariness around her eyes, the calluses on her fingers from guitar strings, the way she held herself like someone who'd learned to be careful in the world. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, and her speaking voice was different from her singing, huskier, more earthbound. Cole gestured to the empty chair, acutely aware of his rough appearance, the trail dust ingrained in his clothes. "It's a free country," he said, then winced at his choice of words. Freedom was a relative thing for a man with a price on his head. She settled across from him, folding her hands on the scarred table. "I haven't seen you before, just passing through. That's what they all say." A slight smile. "Though, in your case, I suspect it's true." The bartender brought her a cup of tea without being asked, and she wrapped her fingers around it gratefully. Cole noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "You all right?" he asked, surprising himself with the concern in his voice. "Stage nerves," she said. "They never quite go away. My father used to say that's how you know it matters." "Your father a musician?" "A minister." Her laugh was soft and bitter. He had quite definite opinions about his daughter singing in saloons. Said I was consorting with the devil's own choir. Cole thought about his own father, dead these 10 years, who'd wanted nothing more than for his son to take over the family farm. Fathers have a way of wanting us to be what they understand. She studied him over her teacup. "And what did yours want you to be?" "Respectable," Cole said, and found himself almost smiling. Didn't quite work out. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the saloon's noise creating a kind of private bubble around them. Cole found himself memorizing details. The small scar on her left hand, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the green flecks in her brown eyes. "I heard men talking," she said quietly, "about a stranger with a scar. They seemed interested." Cole's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, then stopped. "Men talk. It's what they do. These men wore badges." His blood chilled, but he kept his face neutral. "Lot of men wear badges out here. Doesn't always mean much." "No," she agreed. "But sometimes it does." She rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt. "I have another set in an hour. Perhaps you'll stay." He should have left then. Should have collected his gear and ridden hard for the territorial line. Instead, he heard himself say, Perhaps I will." She paused, looking down at him with an expression he couldn't read. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, "Be careful. Mr. Cole," he said, giving her his first name like a gift. "Just Cole. Be careful. Just Cole," she said, and moved away through the crowd. He watched her go, then casually surveyed the room. There, 2 men at the bar who weren't drinking, whose eyes kept moving, whose coats bulged in telltale places. They had the look of professionals, not local lawmen, but hunters who made their living on bounties. Cole finished his whiskey slowly, considering his options. The smart play was to slip out the back, get his horse, and disappear into the desert. But that would mean never hearing her sing again, never learning why her eyes held shadows that matched his own. When Clara returned to the platform for her second set, Cole made his decision. He caught her eye and touched his hat brim slightly, a warning and a farewell. Understanding flickered across her face. Then she began to sing, and her voice seemed to carry extra weight, as if she were pouring all the words she couldn't say into the melody. The song was new to him, something about a rider on a dark horse and a woman who waited by a window. But when she reached the chorus, the words hit him like a physical blow. The lonely outlaw wanted only a song, until her midnight voice set his blood on fire. She'd heard him. That whispered confession in the crowded saloon? She'd somehow heard and woven it into her music. Cole sat frozen, feeling exposed and oddly exhilarated. When had anyone last listened to him that carefully? When had his words last mattered to another soul? The bounty hunters were moving now, trying to position themselves between him and the door. Cole stood slowly, dropping coins on the table for his drink. He walked toward the bar, letting them think he was playing into their hands. At the last second, he spun, drawing his Colt in one fluid motion. "Everybody stay calm," he said, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. "These gentlemen and I are going to walk outside nice and peaceful. Nobody needs to get hurt." The hunters froze, hands hovering near their weapons. They were professionals. They knew the sound of a man who'd use his gun if pushed. "Cole Harrow," one of them said. $500 bounty. You're coming with us." "Maybe," Cole said, "but not tonight." He backed toward the door, gun steady, eyes taking in every threat. The crowd parted like water, most men wanting no part of a gunfight in close quarters. But as he reached the bat-wing doors, he risked one last glance at the platform. Clara had stopped singing. She stood straight and still, her chin lifted, and in her eyes was something that might have been understanding or sorrow or both. Then she did something that stopped his heart. She pressed her fingers to her lips and extended them toward him, a blessing or a farewell. Cole burst through the doors into the night, the hunters right behind him. Gunfire shattered the quiet, muzzle flashes lighting the street like lightning. He rolled behind a water trough, splinters flying as bullets struck wood. His return fire was economical, precise, enough to keep them pinned while he worked toward his horse. A bullet tugged at his sleeve. Another whined past his ear. The familiar calm of combat settled over him. Time slowing, options crystallizing. He could make it to his horse, could vanish into the desert night. He'd done it before. But through the broken saloon window, he could hear Clara's voice, raised not in song but in protest, telling someone to stop the shooting, that violence solved nothing. And Cole realized with a sinking feeling that he was already lost. A man could run from the law, from his past, from everything that chased him. But how did you run from a voice that had found its way into your blood? He made it to his horse, swung into the saddle as bullets sparked off the hitching post. The hunters were shouting, calling for backup, but Cole was already spurring the bay into a gallop. He thundered down the main street and out into the welcoming darkness of the desert, leaving Dust Creek behind, but not far behind. As the lights of town faded, he found himself slowing, then stopping on a rise that overlooked the valley. Down there, somewhere in that cluster of buildings, was a woman who'd heard his unguarded words and turned them into music, who'd warned him of danger and blessed his escape. Cole sat his horse in the starlight, wrestling with truths he'd avoided for years. That loneliness could be worse than danger. That a man could starve for beauty as surely as for bread. That sometimes the thing you should run from and the thing you most wanted were one and the same. In the distance, a coyote howled, and his horse shifted restlessly. Time to ride, to put miles between himself and those who hunted him. But Cole found himself turning the bay's head back toward town, drawn by the memory of a midnight voice that had set his blood on fire. He'd be more careful this time. Scout the approaches, watch for ambush, keep his gun hand free, but he'd go back, because for the first time in 5 years, he'd found something worth the risk. Dawn broke over Dust Creek like a reluctant promise, painting the weathered buildings in shades of gold and rust. The town stirred slowly, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, freight wagons rumbling down from the mines, the blacksmith's hammer ringing its daily reveille. After last night's gunplay, folks moved with extra caution, eyes scanning for trouble that might still linger. Cole watched it all from the hills, belly down behind a cluster of rocks. Field glasses trained on the main street. He'd spent the night circling back, approaching from the north where the old Apache trails offered cover. The bounty hunters' horses were gone from the livery. They'd either given up or gone for reinforcements. Either way, he had a window. He was about to lower the glasses when movement caught his eye. Clara May emerged from the boarding house, carrying a market basket. She wore a simple calico dress and bonnet, looking for all the world like any respectable woman going about her morning business. But Cole noticed how her eyes swept the street, how she kept to the shadows despite the early hour. She was looking for him, or at least for signs of what had become of him. The thought sent an unfamiliar warmth through his chest. Cole waited until she'd entered Murphy's store, then made his way down the hillside on foot, leaving his horse hidden in a draw. He pulled his hat low and affected a slight limp, small changes that might buy him a few seconds if anyone looked too close. The town was busier than he'd expected. A crew was repairing the bullet holes in the Silver Dollar's facade, and Sheriff Dawson stood in the street directing the work, his badge catching the morning sun. Cole slipped around behind the buildings, using the alleys and back lots he'd scouted on his first visit. He was passing behind the smithy when he heard it, a child's cry of terror. Without thinking, Cole burst around the corner to find a boy of maybe 8 pinned against a wall by a spooked horse. The animal, a big roan with wild eyes, had apparently broken free from the blacksmiths and was rearing, iron-shod hooves flashing dangerously close to the child's head. Cole moved without conscious thought. He lunged forward, grabbing the horse's dangling lead rope and using his weight to pull the animal's head down and away. The horse fought him, muscles bunching, but Cole held on grimly, speaking low and steady. "Easy now, easy. Nobody's gonna hurt you. That's it. Settle down." Gradually, the horse calmed, sides heaving but no longer rearing. Cole kept up his soothing patter while motioning for the boy to slip away. The child didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled clear and ran for the smithy, probably to fetch help. "That was brave," a familiar voice said behind him. Cole turned, still holding the rope, to find Clara watching from the boardwalk. She'd abandoned her shopping, and her face showed a mixture of relief and something else. Surprise, maybe, at finding him back in town. "Foolish, more like," Cole said, handing the rope to the blacksmith who'd come running. The big man nodded his thanks, eyeing Cole with curiosity but no recognition. "Walk with me," Clara said quietly. It wasn't a request. They strolled down the side street like any ordinary couple, though Cole kept his hand near his gun and his eyes moving. Clara led him to the small cemetery at the town's edge, where wooden crosses and a few stone markers stood among the sage and tumbleweeds. "They left before dawn," she said once they were alone among the graves. "The marshal and his deputies, but they'll be back with more men." "I know. Then why are you here?" Cole looked at her, really looked at her in the morning light. Without the stage lamps and shadow, he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself like someone who'd learned to be strong because the alternative was unthinkable. You know why, he said simply. She turned away, ostensibly reading the names on the markers. I looked for you in the register at the boarding house. Cole Smith. Not very creative. Wasn't trying to be creative, just trying to be nobody. And before, when you were somebody? He hesitated, then figured she deserved the truth. Cole Harrow. There's paper on me from here to Missouri. Train robbery, they say, though it was mostly mail fraud by the time the lawyers got done with it. Did you do it? Some of it, not all. Doesn't much matter now. She faced him again, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. It matters to me. The words hung between them like a challenge. Cole felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built brick by careful brick over the years. I was young and angry, he said slowly. Thought the world owed me something for all it had taken. Turns out the world doesn't pay its debts. You just end up taking from other folks who probably got even less than you. Clara reached out, her fingers barely brushing his sleeve. The boy you saved. That wasn't the act of a hardened criminal. Maybe I'm just good at pretending. No, she said firmly. I've known pretenders. My husband was one. Cole's jaw tightened. Husband? He died 2 years ago. Lung fever. Though the drinking didn't help. She moved to a small marker near the back, weathered but well-tended. Thomas May. He had a silver tongue and golden dreams. And I believed every word until I learned that dreams don't put food on the table or keep the cold out in winter. I'm sorry. Don't be. He taught me valuable lessons. How to spot a lie. How to stand on my own feet. How to tell the difference between a man who's bad and one who's just done bad things. And which am I? She smiled sadly. That's what I'm trying to figure out. A dust cloud on the horizon caught Cole's eye. Riders coming from the east, still distant, but moving with purpose. We should get back, separately. There's something else, Clara said quickly. Some of the town council want a wire for federal marshals. Others think you helped during the Apache raids 2 summers back, that you were the one who warned the outpost at Copper Creek. Cole kept his face neutral. He had been at Copper Creek, had seen the war party massing and ridden hard to spread the word. But that was supposed to be a secret, a debt paid to shadows. People remember kindness, Clara continued, even when they pretend not to. The boy you saved? His father runs the livery stable. The family you're said to have helped last year when road agents hit their wagon. They settled here, opened the bakery. Coincidence, Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe. Or maybe you're not as good at being nobody as you think. The riders were closer now, their shapes resolving into a group of 6 or 7. Cole touched his hat brim, a farewell gesture becoming too familiar. Tonight? Clara asked. That wouldn't be wise. Wisdom hasn't been my strong suit lately. She moved past him toward town, then paused. There's a back room at the Silver Dollar, storage mostly, but it has a door to the alley. If someone needed a place to hear the evening's entertainment without being seen, then she was gone, her calico dress disappearing around the corner of Main Street. Cole waited a decent interval, then made his own way back, mind churning. He'd meant to leave, grab his horse and ride for Mexico, maybe, or lose himself in the mining camps of Colorado. Instead, he found himself memorizing the layout of the Silver Dollar's back entrance. The riders thundered into town just as Cole reached the safety of the hills. Through his field glasses, he watched them dismount. Bounty hunters. Sure enough, but also 2 men in the black suits and string ties favored by Pinkerton detectives. They converged on the sheriff's office, their purpose clear. Cole lowered the glasses and tried to feel the familiar urgency to run. It was there, that old instinct for survival, but muted now by something stronger. In the cemetery, Clara had asked which he was, a bad man or a good man who'd done bad things. He didn't have an answer. Not yet, but maybe, just maybe, if he stayed long enough, he'd find out. The sun climbed higher, baking the desert floor and sending heat mirages dancing across the valley. Cole settled in to wait for nightfall, checking his weapons and planning escape routes out of habit. But his thoughts kept returning to a woman in calico who saw through his disguises, and a voice that promised redemption might be more than just another dream that didn't pay its debts. In town, he could see activity around the Silver Dollar, deliveries being made, Professor Hendricks arriving early to tune the piano, and there, just for a moment, a figure in the upper window who might have been looking toward the hills. Cole pulled his hat over his eyes and tried to sleep. He'd need his wits about him tonight. A smart man would see the trap closing and ride hard in the opposite direction. But Cole Harrow had been many things in his life. Angry, violent, desperate, and smart had rarely been one of them. At least not when it came to the things that mattered. Darkness fell like a blessing over Dust Creek, bringing cool air and deep shadows. Cole made his way down from the hills, moving with the careful patience of a man who'd learned that haste often preceded a shallow grave. The town was livelier than usual. Word of the bounty hunters had spread, and curious faces filled the Silver Dollar's windows. He circled wide, approaching from the Mexican Quarter where adobe houses clustered like old friends sharing secrets. The back alley behind the saloon was empty, save for empty bottles and a sleepy cat that hissed at his passing. Cole found the door Clara had mentioned, weathered wood with rusty hinges that he'd oil if given half a chance. It opened at his touch, revealing a narrow room stacked with crates and barrels. Through the thin wall, he could hear the saloon's evening chorus, glasses clinking, boots on floorboards, Professor Hendricks warming up with scales that sounded like questions without answers. Cole settled behind some flour sacks where a knothole in the wall gave him a view of the main room. The bounty hunters had taken a prominent table near the door, their eyes scanning every face. The Pinkertons sat separately, nursing beers with the patience of men paid by the day rather than the capture. Then Clara appeared, and the room's energy shifted like wind changing direction. She wore burgundy tonight, a color that caught the lamplight and threw it back transformed. When she began to sing, her voice carried something new, an urgency, maybe, or a warning meant for one pair of ears among many. The song was about choices made at crossroads and the weight of unspoken words. Halfway through her second number, Trouble walked in wearing a dusty badge and road-worn leather. 3 men, hard-faced and trail-dirty. With the look of hunters who'd run their quarry to ground too many times to count, they conferred briefly with the bounty men. And Cole saw money change hands. His life's value counted out in gold coins. One of them, a tall scarecrow with dead eyes, produced a wanted poster and began showing it around. Cole couldn't see the details from his hiding spot, but he knew what it showed. His younger face, clean-shaven and desperate, above a list of crimes both real and embellished. The poster reached a table of miners, rough men who'd been drinking since sunset. One of them, a broad-shouldered Irishman named O'Brien, studied it with exaggerated care. Cole remembered him. They'd shared a bottle once when Cole had passed through months ago, talking about nothing important while watching the stars. "Might have seen him," O'Brien said loudly. "Might not have. Memory's a funny thing when a man's thirsty." The bounty hunter's face darkened. "This ain't no game. Friend, that man's a killer." "Is he now?" O'Brien stood, swaying slightly. "And what's he killed, exactly? Banks that cheat honest folk? Railroad men who steal land? Seems to me there's different kinds of killing in this world." The tension ratcheted up another notch. Clara kept singing, but her eyes flicked toward the storage room, and Cole read the message there, "Be ready." That's when the Batwing doors crashed open and young Jamie Russell staggered in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Doc Fletcher," he gasped. "There's been an accident at the mine. Cave-in, men trapped." The saloon erupted. Half the patrons had family or friends who worked the Copper King mine. Chairs scraped, voices rose, and suddenly everyone was moving at once. The doctor, a grizzled former army surgeon, grabbed his bag and headed for the door, calling for volunteers. Cole didn't think, he moved. Slipping out of the storage room in the confusion, he pulled his hat low and joined the stream of men heading into the night. The bounty hunters were shouting, trying to maintain order, but nobody was listening. When disaster struck in a mining town, old patterns took over, and every able-bodied man was needed. The ride to the mine was chaos and darkness. Horses and wagons racing over rough ground, lanterns swinging wild arcs of light. Cole kept to the middle of the pack, just another shadowy figure in the urgent crowd. Once, he caught sight of Clara in a wagon with other women, medical supplies piled around them. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw fear there, not for him, but for what they might find at the mine. The Copper King sat against the mountainside like a wound, its entrance now choked with rubble and timber. Men were already digging, passing rocks hand to hand, while women set up a makeshift aid station. The mine foreman, a German named Holst, was directing efforts with the efficiency of experience. "How many?" someone asked. "7 for certain," Holst replied. "Maybe more. The whole south tunnel came down." Cole shed his coat and joined a bucket line, passing debris away from the entrance. His hands, more used to gun butts than honest work, soon blistered and bled, but he kept at it. Around him, men labored regardless of previous conflicts, shopkeepers beside outlaws, Mexicans beside Anglos, all united in the ancient battle against the mountain's weight. Hours passed in a blur of sweat and stone dust. Cole's world narrowed to the rhythm of lift, pass, reach. Then, just as dawn touched the eastern peaks, a shout went up. They'd broken through. The rescued miners came out one by one, coughing and blinking, supported by their rescuers. 6 of the 7 walked out alive. The 7th, a boy of no more than 16, didn't walk at all. They laid him gently on a blanket while his mother wailed her grief to the lightening sky. Cole stood back, hat in hand, watching Doc Fletcher close the boy's eyes with practiced gentleness. The crowd fell silent, that peculiar hush that comes when death visits a small community. His name was Peter Kraft, Clara said softly beside him. She'd appeared like a ghost, her burgundy dress now grimy with dust and blood from tending the injured. He was saving money to bring his sweetheart from Ohio. Cole said nothing. What words could matter against such waste? "You could have run," she continued. "When everyone rushed out, you could have taken a horse and disappeared." "Could have," he agreed. "But you didn't." He turned to look at her, this woman who sang in saloons but stood steady in the face of tragedy. "Neither did you." She managed a tired smile. "I'm not the one with a price on my head. Aren't you?" Cole asked softly. "Different kind of price, maybe, different kind of hunters, but we're all running from something." Before she could respond, a hand fell heavy on Cole's shoulder. He tensed, ready to fight, but it was O'Brien, the miner from the saloon. "You'll be wanting to make yourself scarce," the Irishman said quietly. "Them bounty men are asking questions, and folks are starting to remember faces." Cole nodded his thanks. Around them, the crowd was beginning to disperse, exhaustion replacing urgency. He spotted the hunters near the mine office, showing their poster to anyone who'd look. Time to go. But Clara caught his arm. "Wait!" She pulled him behind a supply wagon, out of sight. Her hands shook as she reached into her pocket, producing a small leather pouch. "I can't take your money," Cole said immediately. "It's not money." She pressed the pouch into his hand. "Medicine? For your wounds. Those hands need tending." He looked down at his torn palms, only now feeling the sting. "They've had worse." "I'm sure they have." Her voice caught slightly. "But that doesn't mean they don't deserve care." Something passed between them then, wordless but profound. Cole wanted to speak, to tell her things he'd never told anyone, about the loneliness that ate at a man's soul, about dreams that visited less and less as the years ground on, about how her voice had reminded him that beauty still existed in the world. Instead, he said, "I'm not a good man." "Clara, I know," she replied. "But you're trying to be. That counts for something." "Does it?" She reached up, her fingertips barely brushing the scar on his face. "It counts for everything." A shout from the mine entrance broke the moment. The bounty hunters were moving their way. following some pointing finger. Cole stepped back, instincts taking over. "There's a cabin," Clara said quickly. "Old Trapper's Place, about 3 miles north, where Skeleton Creek meets the main river. Nobody uses it anymore. If you needed somewhere to rest, to let those hands heal." Then she was walking away, back straight, joining the other women in packing up the aid station. Cole watched her for a heartbeat, memorizing the sight, then slipped away into the growing dawn. He retrieved his horse from where he'd hidden it and rode hard for the hills, the leather pouch clutched in his bloody hand. Behind him, Dust Creek woke to a new day, one life saved for each one lost. The eternal arithmetic of frontier existence. But the numbers that mattered to Cole were simpler. One woman who saw him truly. One moment of grace in a graceless life. One cabin by a creek where a wounded outlaw might rest and dream of being more than the sum of his sins. The sun climbed higher, and Cole Harrow rode toward something that might have been hope. The news spread through Dust Creek like wildfire through dry prairie grass. By noon, everyone knew that Cole Harrow, the outlaw who'd helped save the trapped miners, was somewhere in the surrounding hills. The town split like a piece of sun-baked wood, some calling for his immediate capture, others arguing that a man who'd risked exposure to save lives deserved consideration. In the Silver Dollar, tensions ran high. Mayor Garrison, a portly man who'd made his fortune selling supplies to the army, held court near the bar, his voice booming with righteous indignation. "The law is the law," he declared, mopping his red face with a handkerchief. "We can't start making exceptions just because a criminal shows a moment of conscience. What message does that send? Maybe it sends the message that we judge men by their actions, not just their past." O'Brien countered from across the room. Several miners nodded agreement, their faces still grimy from the night's work. Sheriff Dawson stood between the two groups, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Now, folks, let's keep calm. The federal marshals will be here tomorrow. They'll handle this proper-like." "Proper like a noose," someone muttered. Clara watched it all from the corner where she sat mending a torn costume. Her fingers worked steadily, but her mind was 3 miles north, wondering if Cole had found the cabin, if he was tending his wounds, if he was already gone. The leather pouch had contained more than medicine. She'd tucked in a small note, words she couldn't say aloud. She wondered if he'd found it yet. "Miss May," Mayor Garrison's voice cut through her thoughts. "You were seen talking to the outlaw last night. What did he say to you?" Every eye in the saloon turned to her. Clara set down her sewing with deliberate calm. "He asked about the boy who died, seemed genuinely grieved by it." "Criminals are often skilled at seeming genuine," the mayor pressed. "Did he mention where he might go?" "No," Clara said evenly, "though I imagine a smart man would be halfway to Mexico by now. Yet our friend Mr. Harrow doesn't seem that smart," one of the Pinkertons observed. He'd been quiet until now, studying everyone with pale, calculating eyes. "He keeps returning to town. One wonders what the attraction might be." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. Perhaps he simply got tired of running. It happens to all of us eventually. Professor Hendricks chose that moment to stumble through an attempted scales on the piano, breaking the tension. Conversation resumed in smaller groups, but Clara could feel the Pinkertons' gaze following her as she gathered her sewing and headed upstairs. Meanwhile, outside town, the weather was turning. Dark clouds massed over the mountains, and the wind carried the metallic scent of coming rain. Old-timers squinted at the sky and predicted a real gully washer, the kind that turned dry washes into raging torrents and made wise folks seek high ground. At the abandoned cabin by Skeleton Creek, Cole sat on the rickety porch, watching the storm build. He'd cleaned and bandaged his hands using Clara's supplies, each wrap of cloth feeling like an undeserved kindness. The note he'd found tucked inside the medicine bottle lay unfolded on his knee. "Some birds aren't meant to be caged, but even wild things need a safe place to rest their wings. Wait for me." See, he'd read it a dozen times, each reading finding new meaning in the careful script. Wait for her. Such a simple request. But for a man who'd spent 5 years in constant motion, it felt like trying to hold back a river with his bare hands. Thunder rumbled across the valley, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Cole moved inside the cabin, which wasn't much. One room with a fireplace, a broken table, and a cot that had seen better decades. But it was shelter, and after sleeping under stars and stones, it felt almost luxurious. He was trying to coax life into the fireplace when he heard horses approaching. His hand went to his gun, body tensing for flight or fight. But the voice that called out made him holster the weapon. "Cole, it's Clara. I've brought supplies." He opened the door to find her sitting a borrowed horse, rain already soaking through her traveling cloak. Behind her, tied to her saddle, was a pack mule loaded with bundles. "You shouldn't be here," he said, even as he helped her down. "If anyone followed you, no one followed," she said firmly. "I told them I was visiting the widow Morrison out past Juniper Hill. She's poorly, and everyone knows I read to her sometimes." They unloaded the supplies quickly as the rain intensified. Food, blankets, ammunition, even a few books. Cole watched her work with growing amazement. This woman, who owed him nothing, was risking everything to help him. "Why?" he asked finally, as they stood in the doorway watching the storm turn the landscape into a gray blur. Clara was quiet for a long moment. "My father used to preach about redemption," she said finally. "How it was always possible, right up until your last breath. I didn't believe him then, thought it was just pretty words to comfort the congregation. But lately," she turned to look at him, "lately I've been thinking maybe redemption isn't something that happens to you. Maybe it's something you choose, one moment at a time. And if the choosing gets you killed, then at least you die moving towards something instead of away from it." Lightning split the sky, illuminating her face in stark relief. Cole saw determination there, and something else, a loneliness that matched his own. Without thinking, he reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm poison, Clara. Everything I touch goes bad." "That's not what I saw last night," she said softly. "I saw a man who could have run but stayed, who worked until his hands bled to save strangers. That's not poison. That's humanity." The storm was fully upon them now, rain drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. They moved inside, and Cole finally got the fire going. Clara spread her cloak to dry and settled on the floor near the warmth, looking younger and more vulnerable than he'd seen her. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me how it started. All of it." So he did, in the firelight, with the storm raging outside. Cole told her things he'd never spoken aloud, about his father's death and the farm lost to bankers, about the first robbery, how easy it had been, how the anger had felt like righteousness, about the slide from desperate boy to hardened criminal, each choice making the next one easier until choosing wasn't really part of it anymore. Clara listened without judgment, occasionally asking a quiet question. When he told her about Copper Creek, about warning the settlement, her eyes shone with unshed tears. "You see," she said, "even then, you couldn't fully close off your heart. One good deed doesn't erase 100 bad ones." "No," she agreed, "but it's a start." They talked as the storm raged, about her marriage, her father's disappointment, the way music had saved her when everything else failed, about dreams deferred and paths not taken, about the peculiar freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose. "I should go," Clara said finally, though neither of them moved. "If I'm not back by nightfall, questions will be asked. The storm's not letting up." Cole observed. Indeed, if anything, it had intensified. The creek outside was rising, and the rain showed no signs of slackening. "Then questions will be asked," Clara said with a rueful smile. "Add it to the list of scandals surrounding the minister's wayward daughter." But she made no move to leave, and Cole made no move to insist. They sat in companionable silence, watching the fire dance, while outside the storm tried to wash the world clean. Finally, Clara spoke again. They want to bring in more hunters. The mayor's offering his own money to sweeten the bounty. Says you're a danger to the moral fabric of the community. He's not wrong. He's not right either. She turned to face him fully. Cole, you can't keep running forever. In this town, there are people here who'd speak for you. O'Brien and the miners, the Baker family, others who've seen your true nature, even if they didn't know your name. Speaking for me would only bring trouble on them. Maybe they think you're worth the trouble. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Cole wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't worth anyone's trouble, least of all hers. But looking at her face in the firelight, seeing the conviction there, the words died unspoken. There's another way. Clara said suddenly. Judge Thornton in Cedar Falls. He's known for being fair. If you turned yourself into him, made your case, with character witnesses and evidence of your recent actions, I'd still hang, maybe. Or maybe you'd get prison time and a chance to start over. It's better than being shot down like a dog by bounty hunters. Cole stood abruptly, pacing to the small window. The storm had turned the day dark as twilight. You're asking me to put my life in the hands of a system that's never shown mercy to men like me. I'm asking you to have faith. Clara said softly. In justice. In redemption. In... She paused, then finished quietly. In us. The last word changed everything. Cole turned to find her standing, chin raised in that defiant way he'd come to love. She was offering more than help. She was offering a future, uncertain and dangerous as it might be. You'd wait? He asked roughly. However long it took, I've been waiting all my life. Clara said simply. I just didn't know what for until now. Thunder crashed overhead, and in its echo, Cole made his choice, not for redemption or justice or even for himself, but for a woman who sang like an angel and believed in broken things. All right, he said. We'll try it your way. Clara's smile was like sunrise after the storm, and when she stepped into his arms, Cole understood that sometimes a man found salvation not by running toward it, but by standing still long enough to let it find him. The storm that had started as rain became something else entirely, a sandstorm of legendary proportions. It rolled down from the mountains like a biblical plague, turning day to night and filling the air with stinging grit that could flay skin from bone. Old-timers would talk about it for years after, how the very earth seemed to rise up in anger. In Dust Creek, shutters slammed shut and families huddled indoors. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at roofs and sending anything not nailed down spinning into the maelstrom. At the Silver Dollar, patrons pressed cloths to their faces and squinted through the gloom as sand sifted through every crack and crevice. Never seen one this bad, Sheriff Dawson shouted over the wind's roar. Not in 20 years. The bounty hunters had taken shelter in the hotel, but even they looked shaken. This was no weather for hunting men. It was weather for survival, pure and simple. Cole had made it back to town just as the storm hit full force. Clara's plan driving him forward. But now, standing in an alley with his back pressed against a wall, he could barely see 10 feet ahead. The sand scoured his exposed skin, and each breath was a struggle against the suffocating dust. A child's scream cut through the howling wind. Without hesitation, Cole plunged into the storm. He found the source quickly. Little Sarah Chen, the daughter of the town's Chinese launderer, clinging to a porch post as the wind tried to tear her away. Her parents' shop was across the street, might as well have been across an ocean in this visibility. Cole wrapped the girl in his coat and lifted her, shielding her with his body as he fought through the wind. Each step was a battle. Debris flew past like bullets. Wooden shingles, pieces of metal, a whole chicken coop tumbling end over end. Something struck his shoulder hard enough to spin him around, but he kept his grip on the child. The laundry's door burst open just as he reached it. Misses. Chen pulled them both inside, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her daughter. Mr. Chen gripped Cole's hand with both of his, speaking rapid Chinese that needed no translation. Gratitude was universal. Before Cole could slip away, another crisis erupted. Old Man Henderson's roof had partially collapsed, trapping him inside. Then word came that the schoolhouse windows had blown in, and children were huddled there with their teacher, exposed to the storm's fury. What followed was a blur of desperate action. Cole joined the makeshift rescue parties, his strength and knowledge of rough weather proving invaluable. He helped shore up failing walls, carried injured folks to Doc Fletcher's office, and led a human chain through the blinding sand to evacuate the schoolhouse. At one point, he found himself working alongside Mayor Garrison to barricade the bank's shattered windows. The politician's eyes widened in recognition, but before he could speak, another wall of wind and sand slammed into them. When they could see again, Cole was already moving to the next crisis. Clara had taken shelter in the church with other women, organizing aid for the injured. Through the storm's brief lulls, she caught glimpses of Cole, always where the danger was worst, always helping, his identity forgotten in the face of shared catastrophe. Her heart swelled with pride and fear in equal measure. The storm's fury reached its peak near sunset. The wind shrieked like demons loosed from hell, and visibility dropped to nothing. That's when the real disasters began. Fires sparked by overturned lanterns, structures collapsing under the assault, people trapped or lost in the chaos. Cole was helping evacuate the hotel when he heard about Clara. She'd left the church to help at the doctor's office, but never arrived. In this storm, being lost for even minutes could mean death. He didn't hesitate, tying a rope around his waist and giving the other end to O'Brien. Cole plunged into the maelstrom. He knew Clara's likely route, knew how she thought. She wouldn't have taken the main street, too exposed. She'd have tried for the alleys, seeking shelter building by building. He found her pressed into a doorway 2 blocks from the church, barely conscious. Sand caked in her hair and clothes. A flying board had struck her head, leaving blood on her temple. Cole gathered her in his arms, following the rope back through the hellish wind. The doctor's office was overwhelmed. Injured people on every available surface. Cole laid Clara gently on a cleared table, then turned to help with others. For hours. He worked alongside Doc Fletcher, holding patients still, fetching supplies, doing whatever was needed. His outlaw past meant nothing here. He was just another pair of hands in the fight against death. Clara woke to find Cole beside her, cleaning a cut on a child's arm with gentle efficiency, despite the chaos around them. She felt a moment of perfect clarity. This was who he really was, not the angry young man who'd robbed stages, not the bitter fugitive, but this, a man who ran toward danger when others needed help. "You came for me," she whispered. He glanced over, relief flooding his features. "Always will," he said simply, then returned to his work. The storm began to die near midnight, its fury spent. As the wind dropped from a roar to a moan, people emerged to survey the damage. Dust Creek looked like it had been through a war. Buildings stood roofless, walls had collapsed, and everything was buried under inches of sand. But they'd survived, and the toll could have been much worse. Thanks to the rescue efforts, only 2 lives were lost, both to heart failure brought on by the stress. Considering the storm's violence, it was nearly miraculous. As dawn broke gray and subdued, the town began to count its heroes, and Cole Harrow's name was on everyone's lips. They'd all seen him during the crisis, saving the Chen girl, evacuating the schoolhouse, working tirelessly through the night. Even those who'd called for his capture now spoke with grudging respect. Sheriff Dawson found Cole at the doctor's office, still helping with the injured. The lawman's face was haggard, his badge dulled by dust. "Harrow," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Cole straightened, ready for whatever came, but Dawson surprised him. "The mayor wants to call off the bounty hunters," says a man who saved half the town deserves consideration. "The Pinkertons are arguing, but sentiment's running pretty strong in your favor right now." "I still broke the law," Cole said evenly. "That hasn't changed." "No," Dawson agreed. "But maybe the law needs to consider more than just the breaking." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Judge Thornton's due through here next week. If you were to surrender to me, peaceful-like, with character witnesses lined up, well, I've seen him show mercy to men who deserved it. Cole looked across the room at Clara, who was bandaging a woman's burned hands. She must have felt his gaze because she looked up, and in her eyes was all the answer he needed. "All right, Sheriff," Cole said. "You have my word. I'll surrender to you before Judge Thornton arrives. Peaceful-like." Dawson nodded and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Cole shook it. The gesture was witnessed by half a dozen people, and word would spread quickly. The outlaw Cole Harrow had given his word to stand trial. In a land where a man's word was often all he had, it meant something. As the sheriff left, Clara appeared at Cole's side. Her head was bandaged, but her eyes were clear. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "I'm sure of you." Cole replied, "The rest, we'll face it together." Outside, the sun finally broke through the dust-hazed sky, painting Dust Creek in shades of gold and hope. The storm had buried the old undersand and debris. What emerged would have to be built anew. The town, and perhaps the man, Mrs. Chen appeared with a tray of tea, pressing cups into their hands with a grateful smile. Around them, the work of healing continued, wounds tended, fears soothed, community rebuilt one small act at a time. Cole sipped the hot tea and felt something ease in his chest. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't running. He was standing still, surrounded by people who'd seen him at his best and worst. Whatever came next, trial, prison, maybe even the gallows, he'd face it as himself, not as a shadow. Clara's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. Together, they watched the sun climb higher, burning away the last of the storm's darkness. It would be a long road ahead, but for the first time, it led somewhere worth going. The morning after the storm dawned gray and still, as if the world itself was catching its breath. Dust Creek looked like a town reborn from catastrophe. Buildings stood naked without roofs. Sand drifted against walls like snow, and the main street was barely recognizable. But the people moved with purpose, already beginning the long work of rebuilding. Cole stood in Sheriff Dawson's office, having honored his word from the night before. The cell door stood open between them. Dawson hadn't locked it, a gesture of respect that wasn't lost on either man. "Judge Thornton will be here in 3 days," Dawson said, pouring coffee from a battered pot. "You'll have that time to prepare your case. Miss May's already organizing character witnesses." Through the window, Cole could see Clara directing a group of women in distributing supplies to storm victims, even exhausted and bandaged. She moved with determined grace. She'd been up all night, but refused to rest until everyone had food and shelter. "The mayor?" Cole asked. Coming around, the Chen family made quite an impression on him, telling everyone how you saved their little girl, and Henderson singing your praises to anyone who'll listen about saving his life. Dawson sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Course, the Pinkertons are still arguing for immediate transport to federal custody. Let them argue," Cole said. He'd made his choice, and strange as it was, he felt lighter for it. "Sheriff, I need to ask you something. If things go bad with the judge, I'll make sure Miss May is looked after," Dawson said quietly. "Though something tells me that woman can look after herself just fine." A commotion outside drew their attention. The bounty hunters had emerged from the hotel, faces grim with determination. They marched toward the sheriff's office, hands hovering near their weapons. Behind them, a crowd was gathering, miners, shopkeepers, families Cole had helped during the storm. "Trouble," Dawson muttered, checking his shotgun. The lead bounty hunter, the scarecrow with dead eyes, pushed through the door. "Sheriff, we're taking custody of the prisoner. Federal warrant supersedes local authority." "Now hold on," Dawson began, but the hunter cut him off. "No more delays. This man's worth $500, and we aim to collect." He produced a set of shackles. "Dead or alive, the poster says, 'His choice which.'" The crowd outside was growing, voices rising. Cole heard O'Brien's Irish brogue carrying over the rest. "You'll not be taking him while there's breath in my body." "Well, this is still my town," Dawson said firmly. And he's in my custody until the judge—" The hunter drew his pistol in one smooth motion, not pointing it at anyone yet, just holding it ready. "The judge can read about it in the newspapers. We're leaving. Now." That's when Clara appeared in the doorway. And she wasn't alone. Behind her stood Mrs. Chen with her daughter, the Baker family, Henderson with his arm in a sling, and what seemed like half the town. Even Mayor Garrison was there, looking uncomfortable but resolved. "Gentlemen," Clara said in her stage voice, the one that could fill a theater, "you seem to be confused about how justice works in Dust Creek." The Scarecrow turned his dead eyes on her. "Justice is what the law says, woman, and the law says this man hangs. The law says he gets a trial," Clara countered. "And the people of this town have something to say about the character of the accused." "Character?" The hunter laughed, an ugly sound. "He's a thief and probably a killer. He's a hero." Little Sarah Chen piped up, stepping forward despite her mother's restraining hand. "He saved me in the storm. He kept me safe." Others began speaking up, stories of Cole's help during the storm, older tales of mysterious assistance that people now connected to the scarred stranger. The voices built like a chorus, each testimony adding weight to the scale of judgment. The bounty hunters found themselves backing toward the door, faced with something they hadn't expected: a community united. These weren't hardened outlaws or corrupt officials, just ordinary people who decided that sometimes justice meant more than law. "You're making a mistake," the Scarecrow warned. "We'll be back with federal marshals, a whole company if need be." "Then bring them," Mayor Garrison said, surprising everyone. "But until then, this man remains in Sheriff Dawson's custody to await proper trial. That's how we do things in Dust Creek." The hunters retreated, but their leader paused at the door. His eyes found Cole through the crowd. "This isn't over. Harrow, one way or another, you'll pay for what you've done." After they left, the crowd slowly dispersed, people returning to the endless work of storm recovery. Clara remained, along with a few others. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. That was foolish. Cole told her, "You've made enemies of dangerous men." "I've had worse enemies," she replied. "At least these ones are external." Over the next 2 days, Dust Creek transformed around them. The storm damage was severe, but it had also broken down barriers. Mexican families worked alongside Anglo merchants, Chinese immigrants beside Irish miners. The shared crisis had reminded them they were all human, all vulnerable to forces beyond their control. Cole, technically a prisoner but practically free to move about town with Dawson's supervision, threw himself into the rebuilding efforts. His strong back and willing hands were welcome everywhere, and if people noticed the sheriff's deputy shadowing him, they didn't comment. On the evening before Judge Thornton's arrival, Clara arranged a special performance at the Silver Dollar. The saloon was only half repaired, wind still whistling through gaps in the walls. But the piano had survived, and that was all she needed. "This is for Dust Creek," she announced, "for what we've lost and what we've found." She sang songs of loss and redemption, of storms weathered and love discovered. Her voice filled the broken spaces with beauty, reminding everyone why humans built towns in hostile places, not just for shelter or commerce, but for moments like this, when art transformed suffering into something bearable. When she sang the song about the outlaw and the midnight voice, Cole felt every eye in the room turn to him, but there was no judgment in those gazes now, only understanding. They'd all been broken by the storm in some way. They were all rebuilding. After the performance, Clara found Cole on the saloon's damaged porch, looking out at the desert. The stars were brilliant, undimmed by dust for the first time in days. "Tomorrow," she said simply. "Tomorrow." He agreed. "Are you afraid?" Cole considered the question. "Of dying? No. I've been half dead for years anyway. But of disappointing you, of failing to be the man you see when you look at me, that terrifies me." Clara moved closer, her warmth a comfort against the cool night air. "Then don't fail. It's that simple. Nothing's that simple. Love is," she said. "Everything else The law, the past, the opinions of others, that's all just noise. Love is the only simple truth I've found in this complicated world. They stood together in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the desert, coyotes sang their ancient songs. The town around them slept, gathering strength for whatever tomorrow would bring. "I need to tell you something," Cole said finally. "In case I don't get another chance, these past days, since I heard you sing, I've felt more alive than in all the years of running. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you gave me that. You gave me a reason to stop running." Clara turned to face him, and in the starlight her eyes were luminous with unshed tears. "Then whatever happens, we've already won." She kissed him then, soft and fierce at once, a promise and a farewell and a beginning all in one moment. When they parted, Cole understood that some things were worth any price, even justice itself. "Sing for me," he said, "one more time." So there on the broken porch of a half-destroyed saloon, Clara sang, not for an audience or coins in a hat, but for one man who'd found his way home through her voice. The melody drifted over Dust Creek like a blessing, carrying hope into every corner of the storm-scarred town. Tomorrow would bring judgment, but tonight there was only the song, the stars, and two souls who'd found each other against all odds. In a hard land that broke most people, they'd discovered the unbreakable thing that lived in the space between two hearts. The night wind carried Clara's voice far into the desert, where it echoed off red rocks and ancient stones, becoming part of the landscape itself, a reminder that beauty could bloom anywhere, even in the most unlikely ground. Judge Thornton arrived with the morning sun, his black carriage cutting through the dawn mist like a harbinger of fate. Cole watched from the sheriff's office window as the old man stepped down, thin as a rail, with sharp eyes that had seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything anymore. The trial was set for noon in the largest building still standing, the Methodist Church, its steeple miraculously untouched by the storm. By 11, every bench was full, and people stood along the walls and crowded outside the windows. This wasn't just about Cole Harrow anymore. It was about what kind of town Dust Creek wanted to be. "You ready?" Sheriff Dawson asked, adjusting his own coat. He'd agreed to stand as a character witness, a decision that could cost him his badge. Cole nodded, though ready seemed like too simple a word for what he felt. He wore his best clothes, which weren't much, but Clara had cleaned and mended them with careful hands. His weapons were locked away, and without them, he felt naked as a newborn. Clara waited outside the church, wearing her burgundy dress from that first night. When she saw him, she smiled, brave and tremulous at once. "Remember," she said quietly, "you're not the man on that wanted poster anymore. Show them who you've become." Chill. Inside, Judge Thornton had transformed the altar area into a makeshift courtroom. The Pinkertons sat on one side, armed with documents and cold certainty. On the other side, Clara had assembled Cole's witnesses, a ragtag collection of miners, merchants, and mothers who'd seen him at his best. "This is an informal hearing," Judge Thornton began, his voice dry as desert wind. "But make no mistake, the decisions made here carry the full weight of law. Mr. Harrow, you stand accused of robbery, assault, and evading justice. How do you plead?" Cole stood, feeling every eye upon him. "Guilty, Your Honor, to some of it, but I'd like the chance to explain." For the next hour, the truth spilled out. Cole told his story without embellishment or excuse. The young man driven to desperation, the choices that led to worse choices, the years of running that solved nothing. He spoke of Copper Creek, of warning the settlement despite the risk to himself. He talked about the storm, about choosing to help instead of flee. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he concluded, "just for the chance to make amends, to be something more than my worst mistakes." The Pinkertons presented their case with mechanical efficiency. Dates, places, amounts stolen. They painted Cole as a calculating criminal who'd shown kindness only when cornered. Their truth was accurate, but incomplete, like a map that showed roads but not the reasons for traveling them. Then came the witnesses, One by one, the people of Dust Creek stood and spoke. Mrs. Chen, through a translator, told of her daughter's rescue. Henderson described being pulled from his collapsed roof. O'Brien and the miners testified about the mine rescue, how Cole had worked until his hands bled. But it was Clara who provided the moment that changed everything. "Your Honor," she said, taking the stand with quiet dignity. "I've known desperate men. My late husband was one. Desperation makes people small, selfish, grasping, but that's not what I've seen in Cole Harrow. I've seen a man who runs toward danger when others need help, who gives when he has nothing, who risks his freedom for strangers." She paused, her eyes finding Cole's across the crowded church. "They say love is blind, and maybe that's true, but sometimes love lets us see clearly for the first time. I see Cole Harrow, Your Honor, all of him, and I'm not afraid." Judge Thornton listened to it all, his face revealing nothing. When the last witness finished, he called for a recess, retiring to the vestry to consider. The crowd waited in tense silence, the minute hand on the church clock moving with agonizing slowness. When the judge returned, his expression was grave. "Mr. Harrow, please stand." Cole rose, Clara's hand briefly touching his as he passed. "The law is clear about your crimes." Thornton began. "By rights, I should remand you to federal custody for trial and, most likely, hanging." He paused, and the church held its breath. "But the law without mercy is merely vengeance, and justice without the possibility of redemption serves no one." He shuffled his papers, finding what he sought. "I hereby sentence you to 5 years of probation to be served here in Dust Creek under the supervision of Sheriff Dawson. You will make restitution for your crimes through labor, specifically helping to rebuild this town and serving its people. Any violation of this trust, any return to your old ways, and you'll serve 20 years in territorial prison." The church erupted. Some cheered, others protested, but Cole heard none of it. He was looking at Clara, who was crying and smiling at once, her face radiant with joy. "Furthermore," Judge Thornton continued, raising his voice over the noise, "should you complete your probation successfully, your record will be, if not cleared, then at least closed. The man you were will be legally dead. The man you choose to become, that's up to you." As the crowd surged forward, Cole found himself surrounded by well-wishers and backslappers, but he had eyes only for Clara, who waited by the church door, patient as always. They walked out together into the afternoon sun, which had never seemed brighter. The town around them was still half ruined, but already people were returning to the work of rebuilding, energized by the day's events. 5 years, Clara said softly. "That's a long time to stay in one place." "I've been running for 5 years," Cole replied. "Seems fitting to stand still for the same." They walked toward the edge of town, where the desert began its endless reach toward the horizon. Neither spoke of the future, the struggles ahead, the debts to be paid, the challenge of building a life from fragments. All that would come. For now, there was just this, a man and woman standing together, looking out at the vast landscape that no longer seemed empty but full of possibility. Behind them, Dust Creek continued its resurrection, the sound of hammers and saws a rhythm of hope. "So what now?" Clara asked. Cole took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt. "Now we build a life, a home, a future, together." She smiled, and in that smile was everything. Acceptance, challenge, promise. "Together," she agreed, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. They turned back toward town. There was work to be done, a community to serve, a new life to construct from the ashes of the old. But first, Cole had one more thing to say. He stopped, turning Clara to face him, and spoke the words that had been building in his heart since that first night in the Silver Dollar. "I love you, Clara May. I loved you from the moment you sang, and I'll love you through whatever comes next." "I know," she said simply. "I've known all along. Why else would a sensible woman take up with a reformed outlaw?" They laughed then, the sound carrying across the desert like music. And as they walked back into Dust Creek, their town now, their home, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. The lonely outlaw had wanted only a song, but he'd found so much more. Redemption, community, and a love that burned brighter than desert stars. In a land that broke most people, Cole Harrow and Clara May had found the unbreakable thing that lived between two hearts. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Clara began to hum. Soon she was singing, her voice floating over the town like a benediction. And Cole, walking beside her, finally understood what it meant to be free. Not free from the law, or the past, or the consequences of his choices, but free to choose who to become. Free to love without reservation. Free to build rather than destroy. The song continued as they disappeared into the warmth of the town's embrace. Two souls who'd found each other in the vast wilderness of the American West. And though the desert night was cold and full of dangers, they faced it without fear, for they had each other, and that was enough to turn any darkness into light. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope Cole and Clara's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like our characters connected across the harsh frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of love, redemption, and courage from America's frontier days. And don't forget to share your thoughts. What did you think of Cole's journey from outlaw to hero? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the horizon and remember, sometimes the greatest treasure isn't gold, but the love we find along the trail.